Welcome, everyone. I'm Gloria Condrup, and I'm the Executive Director of the Hoffmitz Milken Center for Typography here at Art Center College of Design. This is our first summer speaker series, Proud by Design. And I want to turn this over to our moderator today's discussion is Clifford Punn. Clifford is the Senior Coordinator at the HMCT, and he's served in this position since 2018. Wow, It's a long time. And he assists with the planning and the coordination of our online speaker systems for the last 5 years, so such as Proud by Design. So I'm going to turn this over to Clifford to make introductions. Clifford, please take it over and welcome everyone for our first summer speaker series.
Great. Thank you, Gloria. We have two speakers today on our panel. We have our first is Eduarda Nieto. Eduarda is a designer and artist from Bahia, Brazil, currently working as Associate Creative Director for Apple at Media Arts Lab Los Angeles. Their work goes across multi-languages and graphic design and advertising with a dedication to heritage and queer culture. In the past years, they have been collaborating with brands such as Dove, Nike, Sephora, Google, Sony, among others, creating campaigns and visual identities worldwide. Eduarda received their BA in advertising at ESPM Rio and a post-BA in graphic design. Kyle, our other panelist, is a human rhinestone machine based in Portland, Oregon. Their work explores letter forms as vessels for expression, blurring the binaries between type and image. As a commercial lettering artist and illustrator, Kyle has worked with brands like Target, Penguin Random House, YouTube, and Instagram. Informed by their love for all things soft, gaudy, and gay, Kyle believes in one thing above all else: it could always be more queer. And so Kyle, I'll pass it along to you. Kyle will be presenting first. Please feel free to use the chat. We'll be taking questions at our Q&A after both presentations today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really want to thank the Hoffmitz Milken Center for Typography for putting this on and for creating this opportunity for us to talk about all things queer and type related. It's a really kind of interesting time to be sitting in this position as a queer person in these kind of commercial arts, and I'm really grateful for this opportunity to discuss it. So I just wanted to talk today a little bit about this time that we find ourselves in. Pride Month is kind of increasingly this hyper commercialized thing, and I thought what a great opportunity to kind of talk about this unusual space of selling rainbows. My name is Kyle Letendre. It rhymes with chicken tender, gender bender. I will generally respond to anything that starts with an L, so long as it is relatively polite. And I'm a lettering artist, illustrator, type designer. I think much like the word queer is so comforting to me because it's an umbrella term that can mean so many other things. I think me and maybe some other designers are kind of still looking for an umbrella term that fits all the hyphens that describe all the roles we do. But for now, I'm just a very queer design person. And I was born and raised in Minnesota. If you hear a "don't you know" come out, that's probably why. And spent about 15 years in Chicago before moving here to Portland, Oregon about 2 years ago. My work is often a blend of letters and illustration. That's often kind of somewhere between type and lettering. It's usually somewhat kind of vintage inspired. I respond a lot to kind of misregistration, which would be a great drag name, by the way. But it's often kind of based on materiality and trying to make something kind of look like it's always existed. Sometimes I like to play with nostalgia, whether it's from the 50s or the 90s, playing with my love for food, kind of going for delicious textures, but more often than not, it's just really, really queer. My work is often pretty sissy. I am nothing but a shady queen. These are all three things you can call me. I think it fits fairly well enough. But my favorite work often gets to draw on this queer experience, and I think that that is the thing that feels the most meaningful in this work for me. This is a project that I just posted this week. It's a Pride Battle for Collective Arts Brewing out of Canada, and they contacted me to do a Pride label, and I kind of found this to be a pretty galvanizing project in terms of just formulating some loose ideas that had been floating around in my mind grapes lately. But I was thinking a lot about how important it is to be able to go into these super affirming queer spaces, like your first gay bar, or your first kind of place where you feel really, really seen, and waking up the morning after and having all of these kind of mementos in your pocket that told you where you were, just felt like something really special. And it helped me kind of put together this idea of, I'm really inspired by mid-century things, but it's a very kind of straight, wide, and narrow representation of people. So I think there's a part of me that wants to play around with some invented nostalgia just to kind of prove that queer people were always there. We will always be here. So all of this is to say that I am gay for pay. I'm also gay for free, but I do like to make a little bit of money off of it. And I think before I get too deep, I do want to put out this very earnest sentiment that I am nothing if not extremely grateful to be able to do queer-informed work. It's definitely not something that I ever thought was possible, and it's certainly nothing that I take for granted. It's allowed me to connect with so many other people that I would have never met if not for this weird vocation of loving letter forms and queerness. But I also think that this is kind of a rare space to maybe examine that a little bit more closely and look at the intersection of where capitalism and queerness kind of meet. Because I think there's just some kind of inherent weirdness that happens. And so this is all kind of discussing this idea that maybe you've heard about called rainbow capitalism. It's sometimes also called pride washing or pink washing. It's a term used to describe the commercialization and commodification of LGBTQIA plus movements, most notably Pride. I really liked this definition via Refinery 29. And sometimes it shows up in ways that are really kind of meaningful. This was a project that I worked on with Saks Underwear, and they reached out to me to design an underwear that would benefit a charity, which is truly one of the more unusual prompts I think I've ever received. But I was really interested in this because I was able to help direct the money towards a charity that I believed in. And in this case, we chose SAGE, which is an organization that goes to look after LGBTQIA plus elders. So thinking about all of these people that have fought really hard for us to have any kind of freedoms in society and wanting to make them feel more comfortable was a really meaningful thing. And also selfishly, like this photo shoot is the most exciting, cool thing that I've ever been a tangential part of. Sometimes the work ends up being kind of topical. This was last year when the book bans kind of started taking shape in the States, and Penguin Random House commissioned me to do a series of lettering for billboards and zines based on the quotes from some queer authors, which was really, really meaningful. And kind of wild to think about where we were a year ago, thinking it couldn't possibly get weirder. And then sometimes it's just kind of for joy and for fun and expression. This was for Figma. So if you ever find yourself in that space and want to just kind of queer up that workspace, these are stickers that are available, which were a lot of fun to draw. And so while kind of critiquing all of these spaces, I'm absolutely throwing stones from within a glass house. I don't say any of this to kind of like cancel anybody, certainly, or to come in too hot. I think I'm kind of using this as an opportunity to shine the uncomfortable light directly in my own face and kind of examine how these things interact. And also a quick aside, there's a mix of my illustrations in here and a bunch that I found via lavenderzines.com. It's an archive I just discovered that has a bunch of mid-century queer zines, and these illustrations were just too perfect not to include. So please enjoy them. So all of this ability to do kind of queer work stands in direct opposition to a lot of what I had been kind of given in terms of advice when I was in college. The prevailing wisdom at the time was to be an empty slate, be a blank vessel for people to be able to mold. I think the idea that I remember, and I don't think it was wielded with any malicious intent, it was very much like you should not bring too many of your own ideas, too much of your own style, because clients and art directors alike want to be able to kind of mold and direct you. And while I think that that was probably informed by experience, it ends up also mirroring a lot of white supremacist frameworks to minimize one's identity or humanity or culture and focus just on your output, which is to say that you are only as good as what you produce and that we are interested in nothing more. And I kind of fundamentally, vehemently disagree with this, because in contrast, a lot of things about queer ideology focus on seeing our many intersecting identities and how those work together. And it's also about kicking things open, about making sure that more people have access to more things. It's about keeping your glittered heel in the door for the next queen to come in and the next queen after that. As they say, if you don't have anything nice to say, come sit by us. But it kind of left me in this weird position in between hyper-capitalist environments that we all find ourselves in, and also this desire for softness, queerness, community. And so I find myself kind of in these spaces that can be hostile towards others in a lot of different ways. And so it kind of left me with like, where do I make work in this space? So it led me to some personal work. This is a project I sewed a number of years ago. I grew up in this kind of machismo environment that was very much like boys don't sew, they don't care about clothes or music or letters. And I had this moment a number of years ago realizing that I had kind of made this life for myself out of all the things that boys don't do. So this was a thing before quarantine that I just got really into watching Great British Bake Off and sewed all of these sequins one by one and attached it to a pleather jacket for my own kind of sissy punk suit of armor. And often in my personal work, I like to have it kind of reflect the community to which I belong, or at least kind of try to help those situations, raise awareness. My good friend Jenna Blazevich, who runs the studio of Itchcraft in Chicago, was working with different illustrators, designers, each one a different month last year, and then raffling off one chain stitch banner to go, and all that money would benefit an organization of our choice. So I chose the LGBTQ Freedom Fund, which posts bail for queer folks that are in jails or detention centers that can be very unsafe for people. So whenever I can kind of make it leave the Instagram square, I think that's always ideal. But putting out queer work was kind of this reactive response to being kind of stifled in a lot of my kind of agency roles. But it also works as a smoke signal, much how I find myself kind of coming out in various ways when I first meet people. It's a bit of a trauma response maybe, but it's sort of a way to say like, here's what I am. If you're okay with it, let's move forward. If you're not, we can just go stand at different snack tables. And I find myself doing this a lot with client things too, where it kind of says, if you're okay with a queer designer, let's do this. If not, at least I'm not hiding anything from you. But truly putting queer things out attracted queer things back. This is me in some quarantine drag a couple years ago. So a lot of these kind of prompts came directly from posting personal queer work, which was really exciting. And yet also it's just kind of a weird process no matter what. And this is not to blame anybody. I'm not opposed to feedback or clients or anything like that, especially as somebody who works from home alone. I very much need those insights and feedback that I don't have access to from the client side. But you kind of end up being in this position where it's like, show us what pride means to you, but ooh, not quite like that. Which is just like kind of a weird dance, and I understand, and again, no one's at fault, but it is a weird thing to take part in. I think no matter what, the process of kind of asking somebody to put all of these queer ideas, all of our many personality traits into just a single JPEG will inevitably kind of dilute the sauce a little bit. And again, that's no one's fault, but it just kind of seems to be the way that things go, because inherently it's difficult to try to fit queerness into a box that's for sale. Especially when you are speaking on behalf of an entire community of people, of so many different intersecting identities and backgrounds and cultures. And I think also as a designer who is kind of hired for these things and then who marketing is sometimes made around, it's kind of a weird position in that I kind of feel sometimes I don't know if I'm speaking on behalf of a company, because truly I don't have access to how they treat people internally, much less how queer folks are treated all up and down the means of production and distribution. So this is all kind of my way of saying that I am very good at making things much more complicated in my head than maybe they ought to be. I think at its core, queerness and capitalism will always generate a certain kind of friction. And this is an image I may get tattooed. It's just too good from that Lavender Zine site. And so we find ourselves here in June, and we've kind of come to expect this certain song and dance from Pride. Certainly in the last 15 years that I've been going to Pride, it all kind of looks more or less the same. Every June, from the 1st until strictly the end of the month, and then it goes back to normal colors, we sort of expect every corporate company that we follow to rainbow wash their logos in various ways. It's kind of a meme on the gay internet that we just expected, and once July comes back, everything is straight again. But it is just kind of a weird thing to witness in person. And of course, it's a very long shot from how far we've gone since the very first Pride. As you may know, the first Pride that we celebrate here in the States was a response to targeted and prolonged police harassment of LGBTQIA plus people, predominantly queer people of color, predominantly trans people. And it was a response, a backlash back at all of that. And so the parades that we know now in that sense started a year after to commemorate. And over time, they've changed as every part of society has. But in the last 15 years since I've been going, this is kind of what most of them look like, which are a lot of kind of corporatized pride floats that feel like maybe a lot of VPs getting drunk on the float, which sounds like a lot of fun internally. And also when you're just on the sidelines, it's a bit of a weird process. A lot of these like multinational companies don't really have a stake in the direct community that they are participating in. And I get that, that's all part of it, but it is kind of weird. You get thrown all of these like Mardi Gras beads with the bank logo on it, and it kind of reminds you that there is a budget for this sort of a thing, but maybe that budget falls under promotion and not really kind of like community give back in that way. And I think that that's because these companies, from how I understand it, of course, if you're going to produce millions of things, you probably want to put your logo on it, and that makes sense to me. And also the process of doing that ends up kind of centering the corporation in the conversation. So the message is a little bit convoluted. I don't know if this is like for gay McDonald's people or what it's for. If the fries are gay, maybe they're more delicious now, who knows? But it leads us to asking a lot like, who wanted this, frankly? Especially this one with milk-brown pride treats. I kind of wonder like, what dog was so embarrassed to go take a really straight treat to its queer owners? Well, now it doesn't have to. It's just kind of a weird thing that we've ended up with. And pride lines at stores, they show up all the time. And the kind of prevailing wisdom seems to be that if we slap a rainbow on things, queer people will buy them. And the truth is we do. But it ends up feeling like the bare minimum, just because what we really need is more gender expansive clothing if we're to engage in this sort of a thing. Or ideally, more meaningful than that would be maybe something like making sure that access to bathrooms and changing rooms were protected nationwide, even despite statewide rules. So, but when they do try to make these types of things happen, there is significant backlash. And we've seen a lot of that, especially this year, which is pretty terrifying to behold. And sometimes it's even happening at record speed. This happened via the Major League Baseball socials. They kind of turned everything rainbow colored, and within hours they had received enough outrage that they took it all back down to the standard colors, which is just kind of terrifying to witness in real time. Perhaps you've heard also of some of the similar things happening with Target's line of Pride things, or Pride memorabilia, various merch pieces. They engaged with a trans artist out of the UK named Eric Carnell to do some designs. And the pieces themselves were all very playful and fun, but people online, those who were outraged at all of this, went to look up Eric Carnell's own work for his own line, Ab Prowlin, and found all of these kind of other things that were maybe a little bit more playful and not necessarily mass market. This homophobe headrest, a guillotine. I have no notes personally. I think it's great, but it is just kind of this terrifying implication that our own personal work and ideology will also be used against us and potentially weaponized as a bit of a wedge between us and a paying client. And we've certainly seen that work with Dylan Mulvaney, the trans activist and influencer who was at the center of some outrage from her partnership with Bud Light. That was just really cute and kind of innocuous. So it's really kind of crazy to watch this all happen in real time. And I think the scarier thing is also that giving into these bigots, giving into this thing will only embolden them. At this point, I'm kind of worried that those who are acting out this way are realizing that this sort of cycle of threatening and outrage works, which just sets a very terrifying precedent. And I think ultimately it's a reminder that to be queer is to have one's existence, validity, and dignity up for debate constantly. And I think a lot about what this means for queer youth. think we find ourselves in the States in this dialogue a lot about what are these implications around LGBTQ conversations in youth, but particularly what does it mean for gender nonconforming trans youths to bear witness to all of this happening in the broad society? What does it mean for a grown man to walk by a shirt in Target that says something like trans people exist and to fly into a total blind rage? It's terrifying to witness as an adult, and I can only kind of picture what it means for youth who are witnessing it. And so as queer folks, we're kind of in this weird position now where I'm kind of stuck in between two bad things. We don't really like this clumsy, ham-fisted rainbow capitalism, and yet it is much preferable to the capitalism that kneels down in front of fascist pressures. So it's just kind of a weird spot. And maybe it's a hurtful but pressing reminder that we are only valued as long as we can add to someone else's profit. And to be frank, I think this extends outside of just queerness into any kind of identity markers or social movement that logos can be slapped onto and sold. It was never really about seeing our value as people. It was just kind of seeing the value in our dollars, to be really frank. And maybe that's like what was underneath the Scooby-Doo villain mask all along. That's what was hiding under the wig. The spotlight was never on us. It was just on our wallets. And when a community is used to such little representation, and certainly much less representation with any form of dignity, it's really easy to feel like these mean a lot more when it's really just a marketing ploy. And in the end, a lot of these companies that are spending big on Pride are also donating in large ways to politicians who are giving to anti-LGBTQ plus forces, and that is terrifying. So again, I think what I come back to is queerness and capitalism are two things that will always feel like oil and water to me. I think queerness is inherently anti-capitalist because it prioritizes community, because it's a form of care rather than exploitation. It puts people over profit. And I think it's not a single demographic, which makes it really hard for it to get along in the same space as capitalism. And so I think the longer that I'm in these spaces, the more that I find comfort in the ideas of queerness and its healing, transformative powers, its ideas of community and connection and just shared joy and connecting with others. I don't think there's anything quite in capitalist culture that has delighted me and made me feel more aligned with all these people in a room that I've never met before as a good drag member. And that's the energy I choose to return to. So I think kind of in summary, I know this is not maybe the happiest talk in some ways, but I do think there are some uncomfortable truths worth looking at. I kind of think queerness alone can't fix anything, but I think its strength relies in its ability to see all of us not as empty vessels, but as some sort of dazzling light sitting on top of an intersection of a bunch of different identities. It's kind of like this protective thing that we feel towards other queer people. If I see where you're coming from, I also see where you're going. Let's go walk there together. And that is the energy we'll try to bring forward throughout the rest of Pride. Thank you all for having me.
Thank you for that, Kyle. Very interesting to hear about queer McDonald's French fries. It is very awkward. Next up is Eduarda. Take it away, Eduarda.
Thanks, Clifford. Thanks, Kyle. So inspiring. I love to see you talk. I could be here for hours and hours learning and listening you. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Gloria, for the invite. I'm so happy to be here today, and you guys building this platform is so important for us, for our work, and especially for students across the globe. I wish I could be in school and watch something like this. So it's great that this is happening today. That being said, let me share my screen. Yes, this is a little bit of my work in 2023, but since I started almost 10 years ago, I always tried to put a lot of queerness in all of my work, a lot of colors. And from what Kyle said, I really identify myself what they said when it's like, I need to put some of my DNA in what the things I believe when I'm doing something. It's not detached from my work, even though it's a client. In the end of the day, it's always about your baggage and like all the things you construct in life. So before I'm a designer, I'm also from the countryside of Brazil. I'm Rita's grandchild and Sinara's child. I'm a non-binary dyke. I'm a big fan of Lula, and I love couscous. And yeah, I'm a lot of things. Now I'm based in São Paulo. I just moved back to Brazil. I was living in Sweden for the last year, and a lot of challenges you're going to see here that I experienced there. So basically, I'm here today to speak about community, but also about lesbian or non-binary dykehood, visibility in design. I mean, I'm trying to bring a project case from Soul Type, which is the typeface that I made when I was a student. And it was the turning point for my career. After that, all the doors opened for me. And it really came from a necessity and like the desire of feel represented, and a personal story that in the end of the day involved the entire community. So I wanted to share that with you. But before that, I could start with an academic intro, for example. But if I would start to speak like the academics, you will be mainly cis straight guys. So I think you all being very like, you must know a lot about those things already. But I have to say, not all the white guys are bad. I had a very great teacher at Miami Ed School, which was Rodrigo. And he was my mentor and who helped me to build my typeface at the time. And I learned so much from him. So it's really important to have allies, even in school environments, in space like that, help to build great work. So I needed, like when I was in school, when I was in uni, I needed to build my own LATs, because everything that I saw on the screens, on the classes, most of the time, I was never seeing myself. I was never seeing my community. I'm from a very small city in Brazil. So it was really hard for me to connect with design, with art direction, because most of the times, all the things that I believe in, all the things that I liked wasn't put out there as something beautiful, as something pretty, or something that worked. So immediately I started to fight that thoughts and feelings, because I was like, if I'm not correct in this world, why I'm even here? Like, why do I exist? Why my colleagues exist? Or why my community exists? So I needed to start building my own references in my career. And from that, I needed to start sneaking to places that actually weren't designed for me, weren't designed for a dyke from the countryside of Brazil. And most of the times I needed to create my own tools to create the visuals that I was expecting to see. So I needed to look to my own history and the history of my place, of my city, of my town, which means the rhythms, the carnival, the outfits, the poetry, because that's all design, right? Like design is everything that cross our paths and help us to solve something or to feel something. And I didn't knew that back then, but I started to look at these references, at true references of good design, and how could I adapt these narratives to something that I like to see or hear. And something that really helped me was when I was, for example, in Sweden, was to find this book. Because at some point, I really went there to challenge myself to find the really great design and how the minimalistic design and like all the cleanness of the Nordic countries are taught us in the schools. And at some point, like I learned and crafted my abilities so fast and so good. It was great. But at the same time, everything seems super bland. And this is very distant from what we see in Brazil all the time, like explosion of culture, colors, diversity. And for me, I was missing that so bad. And I realized that I needed to spread it out and talk about my truth again and come back to my roots, because it's always the biggest truth of who I am, is where I came from. And that's a sentence that I took from the book from Audre Lorde. That's really speak to me, and maybe will speak to you. It says, what are the words do you not have yet? Perhaps for some of you here today, I'm the face of one of your fears. I am myself doing my work, come to ask you, are you doing yours? The transformation of silence into language and action is an act of self-revelation, and that always seems fraught with danger. But my daughter, when I told her of our topic and my difficulty with it, she said, tell them about it. You are never really a whole person if you remain silent, because there is always that one little piece inside you that wants to be spoken out. And if you keep ignoring it, it gets madder and madder and hotter and hotter. And if you don't speak it out, one day it will just up and punch you in the mouth from the inside. And sometimes when we're working with design and art direction and advertisement, you learn to like swallow up so many things about yourself, about your culture, about your roots, and keeping fighting that is super hard. And sometimes we don't even have the chance because we need the gig. We need to pay the bills. They keep coming, and we not always are encouraged to speak out loud or like our truths, right? But this is a self-reminder when I read that book, to never let go of what I believe when I see that something is wrong, or there is something coming to the screen that I don't believe. Not sometimes a lot of times I don't win this fight, but I will never settle down for something that is not aligned with my truth as well. So coming from that feeling of oddness and like blend from Sweden, and from this very, very lecture, is the same lecture that I gave for TDC last year. And I realized that I was leaving Sweden, and I was complaining all the time that I couldn't find a queer place. I couldn't find Black people, brown people in the city, and I had enough. And I was like, okay, if there is not a space like that, I will create my own space. And of course, I'm talking from my privilege of having the opportunity and possibility to create this space and finance this space as well, because I basically did a independent exhibition in Gothenburg this year. I found a place. I called my friends in Brazil and I said, look, we are coming. We are going to invade this place. It's so white, it's so beige, and we need to bring some Brazilian swag here, and we need to show these people that we are here and we do exist. And I was not only speaking about myself, because Sweden has a lot of refugees, a lot of people from the Middle East and other places, and constantly you don't see these people in the streets. You're going to see them or look to their art in their skirts or, outside of the center city. And this event happened on the of one of the most traditional buildings in Gothenburg, in the city center. So just the fact that we could be there, it was like legendary, like just to have our bodies standing and living and having fun in that space. It was super important. This piece is from Fugida Silk, which is a trans non-binary art collective from Rio. And they made it all the art. They are designers and artists, and they made this t-shirt is a Brazilian soccer game shirt, and they did like silk screen on top of it. And it means so much just to look at it, because in Brazil, the last few years, it was so hard for queer people, especially because of Bolsonaro. So this t-shirt became a symbol of basically rage and bad things. So they using that as a platform to communicate something else. It was super important. And the whole event was basically a large use of type and manifest about who is outside. We want to get in, but there is something or someone inside that do not allow us to walk in through. And that was really important because it was also a gift for Brazilian gods and almost like a thank you, but no, in the end of the day. So it was also a way to say thank you, but politely take my body out of there. So yeah, everyone there in that night was really shocked and positively shocked about how many brown and black and queer people was in the city center, because it was so unusual. And for me, this is so crazy because even Brazil is super homophobic country. We see each other everywhere, every time. So don't have that, like, that feeling that you can go outside and see someone that looks a little bit like you is super, gives a lot of anxiety, to be honest. So yeah, from all of that, I keep saying that in the particular lies the universal. I mean, the more you talk about your truth, the more you speak to other people. I mean, I spoke about something very specific from Brazil in that event, but at the same time spoke to so many people from different cultures. And I think that's a good concept when you're talking about design, because in that way you can find a very cool angle or maybe something very original that nobody spoke before. So that book is the book that I got this sentence from. I really recommend it. It's super great. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about Soul Type. So basically, Soul Type, it was a student project that I made in Miami Ed School. And I made a typeface from shoe soles from dikes across Brazil. Started with my own. And I started to ask people to send me pictures of the shoe soles, like in Instagram, to do this typeface. And I was really encouraged by my teacher at the time, but I was super afraid because I was studying design to reinsure for myself that I was a good designer, because I didn't believe that, because I didn't have like original degree from design in the uni. But he was like, no, but that's you, like this typeface is exactly what you believe, and like there is such original angle in there. But I was like, yeah, but it's a display font. I want to do a serif font, something like that, grotesque, something super sleek and minimal. And he like convinced me that wasn't the best idea. And yeah, it was a lot of research. I think I spent 7 months between taking pictures of shoe soles, building my own campaign on Instagram. And in the end of the day, I got more than 200 pictures from several different states in Brazil. And in the end, I got super beautiful images. And to filter that was super hard, because it was a process to get this image to Photoshop, increase the contrast, get it back to Illustrator, and then get it to glyphs, which was a mess. It was insane. And I wanted to clean as much as I could, but Sayani just told me, yeah, clean a little bit, but don't lose the aspect of this grungy style, because it came from a shoe sole and it should look like that. You don't need to transform into something that it isn't, just to keep the concept, but then you lose the visuals. So I started to play with them and did some physical also prints. I did like this A3 zine that was a better solution, because as a display font, if I use it super small, it wouldn't work, or the visibility wouldn't be great. So I did everything super big. And I did like this towel, and I got my friends to the beach at the day and say like, please help me to take these pictures. And it was really a community feeling, because from the beginning involved so many people. And then my friends helped me with the photographies. So everything that I do, basically, I try to involve a lot of people that I like the work, that I embrace the work, because they inspire me. And I think in design is super, like, at least in Brazil, we try to be so individual about everything that we do. And sometimes we forget about design as a tool to help others. And I think that's the core that really intrigues me and that I really like in design. And yeah, I got some really great feedbacks until today. I see people like using the typeface, sometimes not in such a great way, but like to see that people search for like lesbian typeface on Google and they find that is insane. And it's a free typeface, and they use it even for collectives. A girl like messaged me saying like, I'm opening the first gay bar in the countryside of like Rio Grande do Sul. Can I use your type in the bar? And so it's like, is really out there. I would love to refine this project today, because now I have more craft and more experience, of course. But also, I think it's important to look this work in the past and see the mistakes, the good things. I think there is a beauty in this process as well, because it works for some people. So yeah, it was really amazing to see how it spread it in the community. And that's the current project that I'm trying to revisit, to redo basically the entire alphabet, but from one simple shape, which is the U. So from the U, I'm trying to build this new display font, but can work or not, I don't know. But I think the beauty of that is just doesn't have an end. I think like our stories is always evolving. It will be always shoe soles to photograph. It will be always non-binary dykes. It will be always like queer people out there to keep evolving this work. And I think that's why it's really important. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Eduarda, for sharing that. Everybody, if you have questions, feel free to place your questions in the Q&A if you have any questions or comments for Eduarda or Kyle. I just wanted to start off the discussion. And a question has come before in our previous lectures about how do you select clients, and how do you do you vet them or examine them in a way to how do they need to match or be a good match for you, but with your identity and your politics? It's a question for either Kyle or Edward, for both Kyle and Edward, not particular for each of you.
Yeah, I I think it's important to do a little bit of research just to make sure that we're not, making a logo for something that ends up making the world astronomically more painful in some ways. But I find myself being much more discerning with things that are like queer related, just because often my name is attached to it in a more direct way.
Yes.
Which is weird. Part of what I love about design so much is like the relative anonymity of it. Like no one walks by the logo on a cereal box and is like, I know who drew that. Like there's kind of a relief in that, I think, that it takes the pressure off. So putting your name on things just makes me like more anxious, frankly. And like, yeah, I try not to work for death machines either way, but I think when it's a pride thing, especially.
I mean, I work with different brands, but I try to connect with the brand like this as much as I can. I don't only take queer projects. Sometimes I feel, because I'm in Brazil, sometimes I feel like very, like suspicious when someone is coming to me to talk about like queer stuff. I'm afraid of being pink money, like straightforward like that. So I try to research the brand for sure, like see if there is any backlash, because sometimes the brand is great, but you don't really realize there can be a backlash in the background, So I try to check those things and I go for it.
And I guess my other question would be, or I guess it's more of a comment, but like I think there is I kind of always struggled this myself as being an artist, right? I think I've always chosen to be an artist and photographer, and let me back up actually. I wanted to be a graphic designer a long time ago, but that was my entry point into art and before I became an artist and a photographer. And there was always this kind of tension as to like, how do I how do I have the freedom, right, to make the work that I want to do as a gay man, right? And I didn't feel at the time, this was back in like 1998, this is a while ago. So at the time, I didn't feel like I had that freedom. So I think partially that's the reason why I didn't choose that path. So my question to both of you is how do you feel about your identities and how does that work with being a designer and the work that you do? Because I think I think you've both answered that in your presentations, but I'm curious to hear it seems like how does it work for you? I guess I'd be interested to see what you have to say.
Just a casual, easy breezy.
Casual, yeah, super smooth. I mean, yeah, I mean, and that's a tough one because I think one thing that I said the last time I presented this is it wasn't like from the day, like one day for me to unlock this in my head. But if I walk into a place and I immediately feel uncomfortable, that's not the place for me. I will not force myself anymore to be in a place that I don't feel like myself. If I have to force to be something else, something that I'm not, that can be a campaign, can be a client, can be a company. And yeah, I mean, a lot of times that I'm being interviewed, I ask straight for, okay, do you have a diversity committee and is active? What do you guys do? Like, what is the work? Because I have my friend here, Erica Moreira. She was my ex-partner in AKQA. And we worked so hard to build great things inside the company that mattered to us, So I'm always looking for this comfortable space in my life because otherwise this doesn't work for me. I don't know if I answer your question properly, but that's how I feel. And I think that's one of the reasons, for example, that I left Sweden, because I thought that it is a great place, but it was just lacking for me in terms of representation, like a space to be myself, to lose myself, just to have fun and do my work.
I have a question. Yeah, Kyle. Okay, Kyle, you can answer that too first. Go ahead.
Oh, no, just Eduarda really got me thinking about how one's environment has a really big impact on the work we do. And of course, that's something we all experience. But I think when you are othered from the dominant culture in any way, that kind of disparity becomes louder. And sometimes like people kind of are very explicit about it. I have been thinking a lot lately about like how agency spaces that I worked in were sometimes implicitly or directly homophobic in some ways. And so it kind of led me to working on my own. And it's this weird thing where it's like you realize that some of the people who have issues with those environments eventually leave, and you're like, who is left to kind of keep this place running? But maybe those who have not been used in some ways. But it is a weird thing because it just pushes us away from connection, and isolating myself is like not the most sustainable solution to that sort of an environment. So I don't know. It's all just marinating on my brain.
So, I have a question, and the same thing. One would think, and to follow this up, would think in a creative environment that there would be more acceptance, in terms of, I know, see, and you're shaking your head, that there would be more acceptance to diversity in a creative environment, but apparently you've come up and it's very disparaging to me, you know, being in both academic and in a commercial world, how do you feel the educational institutions are handling this issue of diversity and an issue of acceptance? Have you had any opportunities to teach or to see what the same environment is in an educational institute, higher educational institution?
If you don't mind, Kyle, I can start. Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, because I always saw educational platforms as my like solving comfortable point, you know, like I always dreamed to teach, and I gave some lessons in the past, and now I've been invited to give another class in our direction, and I feel that the educational side of this work is really trying more, like harder, you know, to involve the diversity, because when you assume the diversity and bring someone to teach and someone to share this experience directly with the new generation of creatives, it's such a big impact. When a company is more like, I will ask one brown people and one very queer person to be my, you know, and like 500 people. I think when you hire a teacher and educator in these places, you are affecting so many more people. That makes sense. Like you are talking to much more people. And I think that's so powerful, because I really wanted to see something that miss it for me, you know.
You put that beautifully. I have not been in a learning environment I did like the Type of Cooper online thing. So, and I'm teaching with Type of Cooper in a way. So it's kind of my main purview into this. And so I think, I feel like the last couple of years especially is what I can speak to, of like the opening up of things. Like you used to have to go to New York to take these programs, and being able to do it online remotely with people from all across the world was something that was like really, really meaningful, and kind of underscored how special those environments are, that people were getting up in Melbourne at 2 a.m. to go take a class on writing. And so I think the increased access in that way is really powerful, but also being in a teaching position and being able to kind of say, like, we're not going to use gendered language to describe type, because like that's a very personal experience. What more feminine or more masculine letters look like, it's not actually that helpful. So I think being in this place where we can have these kind of dissecting conversations more casually is also kind of nice.
You can actually acknowledge the Bauhaus for saying we should have no gender in type. They were the first. That's the one thing that I agree with what they wanted to do. I said, "Oh, that's great, genderless type design."
Yeah.
Anyway,
we have one more question from the audience from one of our students, Jamal. And Jamal asks, "What about color matters most to you in each of your works? What does it mean for you? And is that choice in itself radical?" I think this is a really great question, actually.
Yeah, and I suspect we might have different answers. I am terrified of color generally, and some of my work is very bombastic and colorful, but when it comes to working, I work in like black, white, and one pop color, just because otherwise I feel like if I have the whole crayon box to choose from, I get really stymied by choice and can't get started. So I had an epiphany last summer by keeping a sketchbook that was just black, white, and like a hot pink. So I think for me right now, color is intentional and color has narrative possibilities, but maybe I need to be less afraid in the world at large.
It's so good. I relate to that. I love what you say, but I think I get obsessed with some colors time to time. Like, for example, now I'm obsessed with this blue and a little bit of this green. And you always see me wearing that. And I just build like my entire office based on this blue, you know? So it changed. It really changed. I was very Nordic when I was living in Sweden. It was black and beige, but and then like a pop of color on my hair, like always screaming a color and like always black. So I don't know if that helps you, but yeah, I relate to Kyle on that.
Yeah, I love
I
color.
definitely have to, yeah, yes, I have to say, I'm glad we're getting back to a designer question, Jamal. I think you wanted to see, I think color is universal. And I think color in itself is a universal choice. As Clifford will tell you, my color palette tends to be rather narrow. Hopefully it doesn't reflect my cultural and social attitudes, but I like you, Kyle, I get distracted and too many choices. So I tend to be black, white, grayscale, and maybe a little bit of orange, as everyone
Yeah.
knows.
Taupe,
Yeah, well, that falls into it. But anyway,
neutrals.
I think we've come to the end of our session. Unfortunately, this can go on forever. And Clifford, thank you so much for your putting this together, this
Yeah.
wonderful panel. And thank you, Eduarda, and thank you, Kyle, for such, I think, two very powerful and wonderful, wonderful presentations. I really am very excited that you started our first speaker series, and I hope our students and our audience was really, inspired by what you talked about. And I know I have been. I think it was a great discussion by all of you. So thank you again, and I hope to see everyone. Clifford, is it on the 21st?
Our next and last lecture is the
Wednesday.
21st, Wednesday to 21st, and it's with
Also.
Ramon Tejada and Silas Monroe. And you can register, you can find information at hmctartcenter.org to register.
Yeah. But thank you again. It's been inspiring. And I hope that we find another place that we could share and perhaps collaborate again. And Kyle, I'll see you in Portland.
Yay.
And thank you, Eduardo. Thank you, everyone, for, again, attending. We really appreciate your attendance and your support here at the HMCT. So thank you all. And we'll see you in 2 weeks for yet another lecture.
Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you. Happy Pride.